Yeah, it's almost 9, right? There.
It's almost 9, yeah.
Yeah. Waiting for Carl. So I think Carl is about 6 p.m. there.
Nazri, Dr. Hashima is in.
Yeah.
Welcome back, Dr. Hashima. Our ardent supporter. Festival of Idea Perlis, right?
I'm sorry, I always find it hard to unmute myself, to find the unmute button.
Yeah.
But now I'm going to mute myself and
Okay.
and hide my face. So.
Thanks for joining us.
No, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah.
You get real great speakers, so it's a really honor to hear them.
Yep. Okay, Carl is in also.
Hi, Carl. Can you hear me?
You're muted, Carl.
Yes, now I can.
Okay.
Yep, I can hear you and see you.
Yeah.
Great.
Hi,
Good to
Carl.
see you.
Thanks for the second invitation. So you in your lab or in your office?
I'm actually visiting another university at the moment, and so to do this, they stuck me in one of their lab classrooms. So.
Oh, okay.
Which part of the world, Carl?
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. Oh, so you're actually closer to my time zone.
Yes.
And thank you for sharing the questions.
Yeah. I think we wait for another 5 minutes for the audience to. They have a lot of the registered audience is from actually from Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, and some of them from Hong Kong. Because of the time difference, so I got probably someone from Middle East is about very early in the morning, and up to the Fiji or Australia or New Zealand. That's it.
Yeah, so you'll appreciated seeing the questions, but you'll have to remind me because I've forgotten them by now. But
I will be asking the questions all over again.
right, good.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, Carl and Eric, the questions that we had posted, I wouldn't be asking them in the respective orders. I've broken them up to space both of you out, one here and there. So it won't be one person in one go at all the time. So Carl for 1 or 2 questions, then Eric, then back to Carl, then back to Eric, and all that.
That's fine.
Yeah.
If Eric wants to interrupt something or add something that I say, that's fine too.
Okay. But the public question, we reserve it to the end.
Right.
Okay. Okay, 5 more minutes and we will go. The for Eric's update, I used to read a whole complete bio of our speakers, but for this special dialogue, I will just brief call you professor from where and where, and you are to introduce yourselves. So I hope you
It's
do
all
have.
over.
So I do
all on
hope
the
you have
internet.
a nice lengthy bio of yourselves.
It's all on the internet anyway. So as far as I'm concerned, we can dive right in.
Okay. And we should be going.
Eric, you will go to Dubai, right? After this?
No, we postponed that trip.
Oh,
Instead, we're going to Hong Kong in 2 weeks,
okay.
and Japan.
Have you been in Malaysia before?
Oh, several times, quite a few times. Used to KL a few times. I was in Malacca. I was in Johor Bahru to visit. I mean, I was quite close to Zaini Ujang, who,
okay.
Okay.
yeah, just before he took on this government position, I think.
Oh,
He was the president of UTM at that time. So he invited me once to UTM in KL and once to Johor Bahru. So I've been there, I would say, at least 3 times, maybe more.
Oh, okay. I think Carl will have been in Malaysia, right? Before you got the Nobel Prize, right?
I can't remember if it was before or after, but I was there once. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Prabhu, I think we can start now.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Okay. Videos more okay. All right. Salam sejahtera, selamat pagi, and a very good morning to all gathered here virtually. We are here for International STEM and Innovation Colloquia Series 25, a special dialogue series number 2. Thank you to Drs. Nazri Halif and Sharifah Nur Faiza's team, as well as UNIMEP Vice Chancellor Prof. Zaliman Sauli and Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research and Innovation, Professor Rizal Fandi, their respective officers, and broadcast control team here led by Mr. Sharizan for hosting this event. I'm Prabha, your moderator for this ISICS special dialogue series on Beyond the Lecture, Reinventing the Way we Teach Science. This series is a part of the Festival of Ideas under Ministry of Higher Education for Perlis State. Before we begin, as is normal, I would like to very briefly introduce our esteemed speakers for this special dialogue series 2. Professor Carl Wieman, our series 2 speaker in November 2021-2001, Physics Nobel laureate, Cheriton family professor, as well as a professor of physics and education from Stanford University, USA. Welcome back, Prof. And you have the luck of being our second speaker in 2021, as well as the second speaker, special dialogue series speaker. Congratulations on the double second strikes.
Thank you.
And our second distinguished speaker, Professor Eric Mazur. Okay. Professor Eric Mazur, Balkanski Professor of Physics and Applied Physics, Faculty of Education, Harvard University, USA. First time here. Thank you for joining us, Prof.
Well, pleasure to be here.
Okay. We wish our distinguished panelists a very good evening. Our panelists will share with us on Beyond the Lecture, Reinventing the Way we Teach Science. If anyone wishes to ask anything, hope you can wait till the end of our dialogue, or better still, if you could type it into the chat box. Thank you. Before we begin, could our panelists please introduce your good selves and what do you do? Prof. Carl?
Yeah, so I'm Carl Wieman. I'm actually a professor emeritus of physics and education at Stanford University, and so I have an early background in atomic physics research, but then I got more interested in education the last almost 30 years now. I've been doing various studies on how to teach, leaning towards physics, but expanding out into other sciences and engineering about learning and teaching and studying it, finding better ways to do it, research on trying different things.
Okay, thank you. Professor Eric Mazur?
Great. Well, I share a lot in common with Carl. I'm a physicist too. I do research in photonics, which is not that far from atomic physics. So we both use light in the lab. And in about 35 years ago now, yes, exactly 35 years, 1990, I had kind of an eye-opening experience and discovered to my horror that my award-winning lectures in the classroom and students who would pass my very traditional exams actually did not learn the underlying principles. And that was a big shock. And being a physicist who, like Carl, loves data, I decided to research the reasons and the causes and change my approach to teaching.
Okay.
And I should say, Eric and I have known each other and interacted for happily, collaboratively for many, many years now.
Okay, that's nice. Eric, does that explain why you are professor of physics and applied physics, but in the faculty of education?
Yes, I failed to say that. I'm also a member of the Faculty of Education. So like Carl, I also have one foot in School of Education.
I see. Okay. Another question for you. The word Balkanski, for me, Balkans are a group of 11 to 13 countries nestled between West and East Europe. Is there a relation to your position?
Absolutely, yes. Not because of me, but because of the family name of my donor, who originally stems from the Balkans.
Okay. All right, thanks. And with that, we open our box of questions. This is open to either one of you. The first question is, traditional lectures have been the backbone of higher education for centuries. Is this a passive mode of learning? And also, please define what is active and what is passive.
Oh, you want to kick off on that? That's right up your alley.
Okay, so I'll start. I mean, I like to point out that lectures have been around for centuries, and the argument given is that, well, all those physics professors went through lectures and went on to become successful professors. And I like to point out that that's exactly the same justification that made bloodletting the medical treatment of choice for like 2,000 years. And it's only when people realized to do science, you really had to do controlled comparisons. And that's what we've started now doing in education. And when you do that, you find that lectures aren't nearly as effective as people have been assuming, and that there are much better ways to actually do it.
Okay. And what about is this considered a passive mode of learning? These lectures?
Yes, lectures are. We talk about passive and active, and they're not the greatest labels because they aren't that specific. But we think of passive as when the students aren't really thinking; they're just listening. Whereas active is when you have the students actively doing something, where they have some task, they have some thinking they have to be performing. And what I would say is that and when I try and talk about this, I try and be more specific than just active, because students can be doing a whole bunch of different things. Some of them are better for learning than others. And and too often they aren't really delineated adequately.
Okay, thanks. Eric, anything from you?
You want me to add to this question? I think
Yeah.
Carl gave a really good answer. And I share the same discomfort. It's a label that is very broad, and both labels are very broad.
Yeah.
But if you insist on a definition, I mean, in a lecture, you're sort of, subjected to a stream of information at you, and nobody can process that cognitively in any meaningful way. So what most students do is they take a pen and a piece of paper and scribble down whatever they can, but their minds are not really engaged. I mean, it's not that there is thinking, there's no time actually to really think. And an active way of teaching, or I would say learning by doing maybe rather than learning by listening, is one in which students' minds are engaged in the learning process in the classroom.
Okay.
So if I can add one comment on this about thinking about the learning process, one of the, I think the sort of traditional way to think about learning is that there's these student brains and you're filling them up with knowledge. And what we know now is that that's not really the way learning works, that really what happens in education is that the brains are being changed, that through intense thinking, you change how neurons are hooked up, and the brain really gets transformed and has new capabilities. And people just don't realize, people who are like now physics faculty don't realize how much their brain has actually changed. All they realize is, okay, they think they had the same brain because they don't have any other comparisons, and all they did was learn a bunch of knowledge. But what the research shows is quite different, that in fact it really is a process of changing the brain, and so you need that kind of mental activity to impact the brain properly.
Right, and you need to think, I mean, which is, I think, not really happening in a lecture class to the extent necessary to rewire the brain.
Basically, just watching the TV for news input.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
There are plenty of studies that show that the brain, I mean, brain waves flatten out when you watch TV, and it's very different to watch a lecture, lecture in front of a classroom.
Okay. All right. I think since you have defined it that way, then my next question has got a slight error because I did ask why, if it's not broken, why fix it? Okay. But I'll still ask it. With respect to traditional lectures, which has produced everything we have today, from longevity to remotely exploring other worlds, why suddenly is there a need to change this?
Well, who says it's not broken, right? I mean, look at the incredible polarization in society. Look at the anti-science movements that are awakening everywhere in the world, not just here in the US. Maybe it's a bit extreme here, but it's really everywhere in the world. And maybe it's also necessary to recognize that at some point in time, I'll define that point in time in a minute, lectures were a necessity, right? Before there were books, right? Not before Gutenberg, but even, before books were really a commodity, lectures were really the only way to transmit information from one generation to the next.
Right.
In fact, the word lecture comes from the Latin verb lego, which means I read. So it's kind of ironic that they have that name, because that's exactly what is happening. The lecturer is transmitting the information from the book or his or her notes to the notebooks of the students without passing through the brains of either. But that's neither here nor there. But I think we all agree, or have to agree, that education is so much more than just information transfer. It's really, as Carl pointed out, a rewiring of the brain, a making sense of that information, building the mental models that are necessary to use whatever is encoded in that information that we're being exposed to. So now we have many ways of getting information, and we should really replace what we have in the classroom, not to bring the students up to the level of simply absorbing information, but much, much more, right? We can do better, much better, and at the same time probably solve quite a few problems in society.
Yeah, I'll just amplify that on the doing better part. I mean, you know, I would go back to my bloodletting example, which is, you know, people's immune system helps them recover. So a lot of people, they got bloodletting and they got better. And so people decided that was the best thing to do. And it was really only when they could do careful controlled comparisons, they realized there were much better treatments. And in the same way, you know, the human brain is programmed to learn. And so there's certainly people learn things. I think very little of it actually happens during the lecture, but they can have, you know, they learn things from taking courses, doing homework. There might be a few of them that actually process the lecture and learn a reasonable amount from it. But we could, you know, as Eric says, we could do much better for I think if you have better teaching, you could, the good students learn more and many more students learn a lot.
In fact, you know, you just reminded me, Carl, that there was a study by Scott Freeman. This was a meta study done, I think, you know, 15, 20 years ago. I don't know, looking back in time, my sense of time gets completely distorted, but it's quite a while ago. It was a meta study that had really tens of thousands of data points comparing lecture-based instruction versus active learning. And I'm using that now as an acceptable label, you know, given what we discussed earlier. And it showed that students learned more and became better at problem solving and did better on exams in active learning than they did in passive lectures. And I think it was you, Carl, who once said, you know, knowing those data makes it almost unethical to continue to lecture. I mean, it's the same thing as, you know, a doctor saying, now I'm going to do bloodletting.
Yeah.
I just realized that when you brought in the Latin definition and Gutenberg and you went back to history, the way information has been passed down, it just struck me that what we have been doing in lectures is just preserving oral traditions.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've been, you know, sticking to a medieval monastic, you know, culture that dates back 1,000 years ago to 1,000 years.
Okay, that was a good one. All right. Still an open question to either one of you. From your perspectives, what are the deepest limitations, not just in terms of pedagogy, but in shaping how future scientists and engineers think and act in the world? What are the deepest limitations? Carl?
So I guess I'll start because I've been studying Stanford students. Stanford's, you know, is a very elite selective institution, and I've been studying why lots of them still do badly in introductory physics that they have to take if they want to go into engineering. And you know what we see is it the biggest problem is really their education that they've gotten, that by the time, you know, they've done many wonderful things that they don't get into Stanford, but they may still have had a poor physics education background, and that really limits them all through their college career. And so, you know, I see that this, you know, it's made me appreciate how education at every level matters so much, and it matters so much in the long term for individuals.
Maybe I can add something to this, because I mean, you look at small children, and there's one question that small children cannot stop asking. It's a three-letter word. Why? They need an explanation for everything. Of course, it's a basic, I mean, it's sort of encoded in our DNA. It's a survival mechanism. We need to understand the world around it. We need to learn that if we hit somebody in the face, there's a good chance that that person will hit us back. And, you know, everything from psychology to physics to how the world works, you know, needs to be learned. And it's kind of a sad fact that education sort of beats it out of children and replaces that intrinsic urge that humans, and I think, you know, animals too, have to want to understand things. And it's only really after you graduate from college and join some kind of role in society that you rediscover the beauty of asking that question, why? But so we start our life with an intrinsic motivation to learn, an intrinsic curiosity of the world, which gets beaten out of us. And then, you know, some of us maintain that intrinsic motivation and that ability to ask why a little bit more than others, but overall it declines. And then later in life, it goes up again, and people rediscover the beauty of learning. Most of my students at Harvard, they don't want to know why. They want to know, what do I need to do in order to pass the exam? Right? So I think that, you know, our assessment practices play a big role in making education so incredibly hard to move and to change, because it creates expectations for the instructors all the way from, you know, elementary school to college. It's different in graduate school, where you learn by an apprenticeship, where you learn by doing, by being in the lab, by researching, by working with other people. And yeah, I think that we need to, and the assessment and the approach to teaching not only creates expectations in the instructors, but also in the students. Students also resist the change.
Now, I would agree with everything Eric says, but I would add that I run into a lot of people who have had, you know, a single transformative teacher. You might, you know, many of these are ones who they kind of recaptured what Eric talks about being lost, is that, you know, so I don't see myself as that kind of teacher, but I do have seen the effects one teacher can have on really completely changing students' approaches, you know, to their education and their lives. And it just talks to the value of being a really good inspirational teacher, how big an impact you can have on students.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Carl, because that reminds me of something that Rick Miller, the founding president of Olin College, once told me about. And then I looked into it and invited actually the person who did this research. He told me about this happiness and life satisfaction survey that Gallup did. They've been running that happiness and life satisfaction survey now for many decades, and have hundreds of thousands of data points. And one person who worked for Gallup, Brendan Bustede, did research in trying to correlate what in people's education correlated most with an improved, you know, happiness and life satisfaction. It was not, you know, public versus private, large classes versus small classes. There was no information on pedagogy, so that was hard to correlate. So in fact, very little correlated, except that he found that one group of people were a standard deviation above all the others. But for that group, they had to check two boxes. One box was to have had a teacher who cared about you as an individual. And those tend to be the teachers that inspire us, right? The ones that are not just inspiring us by jumping up and down in front of the classroom, but by actually talking to us like another human being and caring about us as an individual. But that's not sufficient. They had to check off another box too. And that was to have, at one point in their education, been exposed to experiential learning. In other words, to be able to put what they learned in the context of something that they were doing. And, you know, if I don't know about you, Carl, I don't think we've ever spoken about this, but if I think back about my education, I can think of such a teacher indeed. And I did not in college, other than joining a research group, have much experiential learning, but that joining a research group for 3 years actually was a saving grace, because that's what kept me in physics, because I was completely demotivated by the rest of the program.
Yeah, so we haven't talked about this before, but in fact, I was exactly the same. I got very involved very early on in a research, doing undergraduate research as a student, and that for me was really what made me want to go into physics, was essentially my entire education, or at least education of value.
And it was not part of the official curriculum.
No, not at all.
And no exams and no lectures.
Right.
Yeah. You're muted. Yeah.
Robert, you're muted.
Related to this, what I realize is it may be easy to change education or the mode of education in university. How are we going to change it on the lower levels? I know it's stateside, it is state control and district control, but for us in Malaysia, it is federally controlled by a ministry who sets the whole mode of teaching, and we just can't change the whole dragon of it. How are we going to do that?
So that's completely outside my expertise. I'm not even going to
I know.
It involves all kinds of factors that I'm ignorant of, and political and social.
Yeah, but we can probably agree, Carl, that it would be a major step forward to, you know, start changing education, not just, let's say, at the college level, but throughout the educational spectrum.
Yeah.
The good news is there are pockets of innovation, and if you step into a kindergarten, you know, you see lots of active learning.
Yeah.
And I speak quite often for audiences of K through 12 teachers, which initially intimidated me tremendously, because I thought, what do I have to bring to them as somebody who teaches at a university? But there are pockets of innovation, thankfully, and I think that in academia, we need to work with, you know, the K through 12 sector in order to really be able to bring about a durable change in education.
I would like to break this session a bit here. I found an interesting question in the chat box by Mr. Aziman. Hello, I want to ask a question. Give an example situation about light. Students assume light has only one color, which is white, but the real thing is we want to explain the light has 7 colors. In your opinion, which should come first? Lecture after the lab session, or lab session first and after that give the lecture?
Maybe I can jump right in here. Imagine that we're launching now into a little lecture to explain this. You may briefly absorb this message, but if we meet a month from now somewhere on the planet and I ask you, you know, can you tell me about the white light, and is it 1 color, or is it 7 colors, or 1 million colors, or whatever? You know, chances are that you will have forgotten. On the other hand, suppose I give you a white light bulb and a prism, and you decompose the light into the different colors, and I make you think about the fact that different colors make up white light. Especially if the experiment surprises you or creates a cognitive dissonance in your mind, you're much more likely to retain that information. It makes it stick rather than just having listened to a lecture. Carl, anything you want to add to that?
Not much. I mean, I would just agree with that. I think, you know, I think there's some issue also if you give a lecture and then do the experiment, which is what I think the alternative is actually giving.
Yeah.
A lot of times
But why not, sorry for interrupting you, Carl, but why not tell somebody, well, before we do an experiment, why don't you do some research on the internet about white light and, you know, color? Rather than listening, at least, you know, you learn also another skill, namely to be responsible for your own research, which is very valuable in anyone's career, I think, I would say. That way you can avoid the lecture altogether and use that time that you would otherwise, that valuable time, right? Because the time that we have with our students face to face is so incredibly valuable. And the more we can use that time to do things that are meaningful pedagogically and, you know, in terms of cognition and learning, the better our students will learn.
Yeah, so that was related to the point I was going to make, which is that if you give a lecture to students and then they go off and do the experiment, if you're not there, then they're sort of left making sense or processing, you know, what they've seen without you there to kind of provide guidance at the time when they're asking questions they need to know. So just in terms of dividing the teaching time, you're not providing it at the most time when it's of the most value, as if when they're doing the experiment, and then you can be there to help. The other aspect of this is that there's some indication that when people are sort of even read about something or heard something in a lecture and then doing something with it, it sort of short circuits their thinking about it. They just kind of will then kind of repeat what they've heard before without really thinking about it in the same way. And so they won't learn as well, actually, as if when you reverse the process.
But give the illusion of learning, or at least the illusion of having taught well. I misunderstood where you were going, Carl. So I thought you were actually arguing in favor of a small lecture. That's why I interrupted you.
Oh, no.
Should have known better.
All right. But there is a point of contention that you could ask. Then what is the point of a lecture? But I see now from both your arguments that it is more of a guidance, setting a standard. What is right, what is wrong, what is the right way to do things, what is not the right way to not do the things, and all that. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yeah, I tend to think there's a place, a time and a place. You know, when we're talking about active learning, it doesn't mean the instructor stands there and doesn't say anything, which is, some people carry it to that extreme and they don't get very good results. And so the point is, you still need the instructor as an expert, but what they can really provide that's of real value is the feedback to the students. So the students have thought about something or trying to understand it, thinking about it, and then the instructor can provide feedback on their thinking to help guide them to see where they're wrong and how to improve it. And that sort of, and then also they may face the fact that, okay, they need to know something and they need, you know, they see, oh, to figure this out or to solve this problem, I need to know certain knowledge. And then getting that knowledge sort of on a need to know basis where they see how to use it, why it's important. That's very, very different from the learning process of being given a bunch of information. You don't know why you need it or what it's used for, or why it's important, and you're supposed to absorb something from it. So I think there's a work by a good friend of mine, a cognitive psychologist, a paper on a time for telling. And so this is really about how telling people things can be very valuable for learning, but it's the telling needs to be in sort of once they've been prepared to learn. It's a feedback in response to it, as opposed to telling them up front something before they have a need to know it.
Yeah, that's a good one. The instructor's part, more of a guiding guidance person.
Yeah.
The guy on the side rather than, you know, the sage on the stage.
Just sage of the stage. Okay, that's a good one. Sage of the stage. All right, I'll move on to the next one. Again, open question to both of you. Was there a defining moment in your career that made you question the lecture model and realize the urgency of reimagining how science and engineering should be taught?
Actually, if I may go first, several. And there's a certain irony in what I'm going to tell you. I started out as an astronomy major. It had been a childhood dream for me. And in fact, one of my first-year astronomy teacher was none other than Jan Oort, you know, the famous astronomer who discovered the Oort cloud. Exactly. And you know, all of a sudden my sort of romance with the universe unraveled, and you know, it was so dry, and it was all about right ascensions and declinations and putting numbers into equations. It was no longer about the big picture. So I was totally disillusioned. I switched to physics because I knew I'd been reasonably good at physics in high school. And it was the same, deadening lectures with nothing but, you know, algebraic manipulations of numbers. And by my second year, I was so disillusioned, I didn't want to change major a second time. I almost dropped out. And as I said a moment ago, it was really the saving grace, in a sense, was going to a lab and do research. And then I went to graduate school and so on. And then, you know, I came to Harvard as a postdoc first, and then I started teaching in 1984. And I'd forgotten everything about how discouraging lectures were. And I started to do exactly what my teachers had done. I lectured, and my lectures were well received, and my students passed my exam. So I thought, I must be doing a really good job.
Okay.
And that illusion, because it turned out to be a complete illusion, continued for probably around 6 or so years until I stumbled on an instrument called the force concept inventory, which tests students' basic understanding of the concept of force. And I gave it with words only, no equations, nothing, just words. In fact, I looked at this and I said, this is so simple. I learned this in high school. I can't really ask my students these questions. But, you know, I saw the data from, you know, the institution where the author of that instrument was. And I thought, I'm going to show that in my class, my students ace this test. And boy, as soon as they sat down, my students, I gave to them, I called it a quiz. I said, it's not going to affect your grade. I just want to evaluate my own teaching. As soon as I started, one student raised her hand, and she asked me, I walked up to her, and she actually looked me right in the eyes, and she asked me, Professor, how should I answer these questions? According to what you taught us, or according to the way I usually think about these things? You know, I did not know how to answer that question. And you know, by the time the test had been completed, it was clear that there was a major problem in my class.
Okay.
So that was a turning point.
Okay. All right. That's nice. Carl?
So I didn't have such a singular event. I read the research papers and Eric's and others and saw, I tended to believe the data. I did do a quick check myself one time on one of my lectures, taking some basic but non-obvious fact and testing the students and 10 minutes after I covered it, testing them on it and finding that 10% of them were able to answer correctly. And that was enlightening, but it wasn't that shocking to me, like I say, because I'd been reading the research before.
May I interrupt you on that? Why did you start reading papers on education?
So I started because of my atomic physics research, actually, and it was the fact that I kept seeing these graduate students come into work in my lab, and they'd done really well on their courses and exams, and yet it didn't seem like they really knew how to do physics. But after a couple of years working, it wasn't that they were mentally defective, because after a couple of years working in my lab, they turned into physicists. And after I saw that happen repeatedly, and I particularly noted that the students who were doing the very best, the very cream on these standard exams, always turned out to be at best mediocre physicists. And that got me convinced there was some question about learning here. And, I saw it as sort of a scientific question. So that set me off to read the research I could find on physics education research and just learning and education research in general.
Right. So basically both of you being kicked by students.
To some extent, yeah, in different ways.
Yeah, in different ways, yeah. All right. Now I'll move on to a bit more focused question. First to Carl. In your research on learning science, what have you found to be the most surprising insights about how students learn physics?
I'm not, it's hard for me to point to any particularly striking insights. I mean, I was, the point I made before was the one that was most striking to me, which was how students could do very well in lots of physics courses and not really be able to think like physicists, and like I said, with the students who came to work with me as graduate students. And so to me, that was kind of the most striking thing that I noticed, but it wasn't, some singular event. It was a common cumulative observation of this happening. It just made me realize something's going on here, and something unexpected and that I don't understand. And so I went off to try and make sense of it.
Okay. In relation to that, education is often measured in terms of grades and completion rates. How do you think we should truly measure the success of learning or active learning in cultivating curiosity, creativity, problem solving in science and engineering?
You want me or Eric?
Yeah, you, Carl.
Yeah, so that there's not an easy answer to that. I mean, we've studied expertise and the way experts behave, and about how they solve problems and make these problem-solving decisions that we see as a very well-defined characteristic of scientific expertise. And so, we've used that to develop some assessments which we can compare student performance with expert performance and give us a much more sort of valid evaluation that really involves giving the students a more authentic problem than they usually get in coursework, and then seeing how they think about solving it. So, that's one way to assess things, but that's a lot of work developing those things. And I think the sort of more practical shortcut is to really try and capture much more of their thinking process in terms of what you're looking at and measuring. I mean, Eric has completely different views on the assessment realm, and I'm not sure I don't know how to do the things he does very well. But from my point of view, I think just trying to the process that students go through and thinking about problems is just a much more meaningful thing to look at than whether they just come up with an answer, where they can follow some memorized procedure without really understanding.
Eric, you want to say anything to that?
I was just typing an answer about rote problem solving to another question in the chat, but I agree. It echoes a lot of what Carl was saying. I'm 100% in agreement with Carl's assessment there.
Okay.
But from a practical point of view, it's not so easy to do that. As an instructor, it's a lot easier to give the kind of straightforward problems that people use. I just don't think, as Eric and I think would agree, they're just not very meaningful usually in how well students answer them.
Maybe I can actually add something to that, because if you think about what is a real problem, the type of problems that we face in life or in our careers, right? Typically, we know the outcome we want to get. In physics, it might be determining the value of something or measuring something, or you walk in front of a store and you see this beautiful dress, and but the price is kind of shocking, and you don't know how you can afford to buy that dress, right? So the end result. I want to buy the dress, or I want to measure this quantity in physics. Or you're the CEO of a company, and the company has a product, and want to make that product successful. So the outcome is known. The big question is, how do you get to that outcome? The problem is that, no pun intended here, the problem is that many problems that we give our students to solve follow a very different pattern. They have what they call a problem, but it often involves applying a memorized procedure to get an unknown answer. Right? So in a real world problem, you're evaluated on the path to the known outcome. In, let's say, a textbook problem in science or engineering, you are evaluated on the answer, not on the path to the answer. I'm just saying something. A car is going along a road, blah, blah, blah. At some point it hits a tree. And then there's a question that says, what was the velocity of the car just before it hits a tree? If you're a student, you think, okay, I have to calculate the velocity. Which equations have I memorized that permit me to calculate the velocity? Oh, I remember this velocity, this equation. Oh, but I can't use it because I don't know all the variable. But I also know that equation. And finally, they find the right equation, put the numbers in, turn the crank, get out the answer. But that is not problem solving. They can't even do this without understanding what the equations mean. Right? So I think we really need to evaluate people much more on the thinking process in the type of problems, as Carl said, that is much more meaningful and much more realistic of the type of problems we encounter in daily life. Some very mundane and other very consequential.
And it's also true that as those students go on into any career, they're going to be dealing with real problems, ones that involve many more complexities than we're exposing them to. So it's not as if they can, thrive without learning this. It's just they're not learning it in our courses. And that's part of what happens with my graduate students that I said started me on this path is they knew how to solve these very clean artificial problems, but faced with all the complexities and decisions involved in doing real physics research, they had no experience in doing that, so they didn't know how.
And I would add to that even something extra, Carl, pardon me. I think that all of those cut and dry, the type of typical textbook problems, I don't even want to call them problems, they're more like exercises.
Yeah.
They can all be done by this device that I carry in my pocket. and AI can really do just about everything that we ask our students to do. Does that mean that we should cut them off from AI? Maybe we'll talk about that some more, but I think that really shows that we need to focus on the thinking process, not on the output from problem solving.
Yeah.
In order to teach skills that are valuable in society. I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal just, I think, about 2 weeks ago that showed unemployment by educational attainment, high school dropouts, high school graduates, college graduates, and then postgraduates, masters, PhDs, and so on. And of those four groups, there's one group whose unemployment is double that of all of the others and is growing at twice the rate of all of the others. I'll let you guess which one it is. It's college graduates. For the simple reason that many companies or employers, I should say, are realizing that they can replace inexperienced college graduates with AI, managed by people who have more experience or a higher degree. Why doesn't this happen with high school dropouts and high school graduates? Because they can do things that AI can't do. They know how to, think and use their hands. So this is really an alarm call, an alarm bell saying, we better do something about education or we're going to become irrelevant.
I totally agree with that. In fact, I think it was in India, they were implementing an AI as a lecturer. The AI was giving out lectures, but I forget which course was it. It was one particular college. And also, it puts me on the path because back here in Malaysia, we are experimenting with this thing called project-based learning, problem-based learning, where we sort of give a problem and let students work out the relevant things about it, not to very extreme level, but what Eric said really strikes the hammer on the nail. It's which equation to use.
Hammer on the nail, yes.
Yeah. Which equation to use? What do I do? What are my parameters? So where does that information come in? How do we fit everything in? And suddenly I think, oh, this is a complicated set of things. Which comes first? How do we teach? Where to put things? Where is information? What information to use? Or that's a whole different level of problem as educators to set in place.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of helping students figure out how to do, real problem solving, there's some research my own group has done that I think is relevant to this. So we looked at experts across a whole variety of different sciences and engineering, and including physics, and we discovered, and what we had them do was go through in detail the solution to an authentic problem in their research work that they'd done, and in great detail the process they went through and all the steps. And what we found was we could really frame their problem-solving process in terms of a set of specific decisions that we made. And we identified 29 specific decisions. And they were, starting with things like, what concepts would apply to this problem? What information do I need? How do I get that information? Eventually, deciding how credible is the information? What can I conclude from it? So on. And so we identified these 29 specific decisions. The thing that was most surprising was across all these different fields, it was the same set of decisions. They were always making the same decisions. Now to actually make the decision always required this, relevant knowledge about the discipline, the context. And so that information was quite different from, chemistry to physics, et cetera. But the fact that they had to make that decision was the same. And getting back to your point, what I've come to believe is that having students actually work through explicitly making these decisions is sort of breaking the problem-solving process down into much more manageable steps for students to learn, rather than just say, okay, here's a problem, figure out how to solve it, which is a very, if it's a real problem, it's very complex, very challenging. Whereas by looking at these individual decisions and we have a template that they work through as a set, it gives a framework that is, I think, much more meaningful in terms of actually learning how to do this. You can sort of build up to it more. I see it as very analogous to the fact that, when you're learning to play a musical instrument, they don't tell you to practice playing Bach symphony. They tell you, okay, work on how to hold the bow, where to place your fingers, et cetera, sort of breaking the problem down into little pieces. And so you can work on these little pieces and then eventually put them together. So I think these problem-solving decisions provide that guidance in a way that's we've been using it some in courses, and it seems to be working, but we don't have great data on it yet.
All right. Moving on, Eric, peer instruction and active learning methods have been widely adopted, but sometimes in a superficial way. What are the most common misconceptions educators fall into when trying to implement these methods?
So I have to jump in here because I've actually
Go ahead.
I worked rather extensively with 2 universities applying these methods on a very widespread basis. So I could tell you right away the big mistake that lots of them make, which is that they don't let students talk to each other. They figure, they'll have the students vote, answer some question, but then why did, they have the feeling it's got to be more valuable for the students to listen to me than to listen to each other. And so that, I have to say, just having seen that over and over again is one outstanding issue that I've seen as people do this wrong. But I'll let Eric.
No. Thank you, Carl. And in fact, I sort of thought, what are the misconceptions? I can think of many. One was, as you said, that simply asking questions is active learning, right? It's really important that the activity, whatever it is, whether it's peer instruction or it's, problem-based learning or project-based learning or think, pair, share, you name it, that it engages the students' minds. And it requires more than, say, superficial recall. So it's not just not having students talk to each other. It's also not asking factual questions, but questions that really engage the brain in thinking, right? If you were to ask your students, what is the color of the sky? and they all say blue in unison, that's pointless, right? Another one, I think, is that active learning requires technology. It doesn't. You can do it with hands on the chest, with, if it's multiple choice, with fingers, or you can have them write down an answer on a piece of paper. I mean, technology is not needed. Technology can be a distraction almost from the actual thinking process. And the third one, which is a misconception I had until recently, is that the instructor needs to know more than the students know. I recently had the opportunity in Delhi to visit a school where this was a school that trained students for the ITT entrance exam to high school students, where an organization called Avanti Fellows was proudly showing off peer instruction in the classes. And I attended a physics class that was mediated by a social worker who had no background in physics. And I thought, that can't be working. This is impossible, right? You need to have somebody who is a content expert in front of the room. So I was really curious. In the sweltering heat, you have to imagine a small room, 40 children in their teens, crammed together on benches, shoulder to shoulder. And the instructor would project questions on the overhead projector, the social worker. This was about torque, and then show 3 answer choices, color coded, and the students had colored cards, and they had to raise their colored card, and I saw red cards and green cards and blue cards, and then the social worker said, "Well, now turn to a neighbor who has a different color card and start talking." And the classroom erupted in chaos, just like I like to see. And then after a few minutes, had the students raise their cards again, and all of a sudden you saw much more uniformity in color. I forgot what the right answer was, whether it was red or green, but they seemed to reach some sign of consensus and it was the right answer from the intelligence in the room. And then, to my surprise, the social worker said, "Does anybody have any remaining questions?" For this question, nobody had any remaining questions. But later on in the morning, after one of these same questions, there was one student who raised her hand, and she asked a question about torque. And I thought, how is the social worker who has not had any physics training going to handle that? And she said, "Is there anybody in the room who could explain what the answer to the question was?" Again, she was trying to play it out with the students. And once I saw it work, and the other times it didn't work. So what she did is she wrote down the question, and she said to the students, "Next time I'll get back to you with an answer." And the question is transmitted to the headquarters of Avanti Fellows, where they ask, some professor to actually give a mini lecture, 2 minutes, answering that question. Very clever, very, very clever. And you could actually see the learning happen. But the most interesting thing is that Avanti Fellows got at least twice as many students to pass the IIT entrance exam compared to other, of these much more expensive exam prep schools.
So you're saying the mode is actually discussion between students?
Not so much discussion, but yeah, discussion too, but really engaging the mind.
Okay, yeah. Cool. That's crazy.
But this is one time when I'll disagree with Eric a bit, because I'm a little skeptical of, that may work in some limited circumstances, but there's a lot of times when very few of the students will have the correct answer and understand it. And then you really need the feedback and guidance from the expert.
Yeah, so they had an expert, but it was delayed, right?
Yeah,
the thing that is so great is in India, there's a huge shortage of science teacher at the high school level. This is just a great way of solving that problem.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's on the teaching side. All right. I get that. Okay, moving on. Still to you, Eric. Technology is often hailed as a solution to education reform. I know you answered this a bit earlier, but beyond being a tool, how can technology be used to make science and engineering education more human, more inclusive, more transformative?
You know, I love technology. I mean, I love technology. I buy the gadgets, driving, you know, my family members crazy because I have to be the first one buying, you know, a VR headset or this or that, and I just love it. But I do not believe that technology is a solution to education. You know, I see so many applications of technology in education that are simply old wine in new bottles. You know, what I mean by that is sort of an old approach covered in a thin technological veneer. Just to give you a very, you know, simple example, do students learn better from electronic flashcards than paper ones? You know, what matters is not the technology, but the underlying pedagogy. And making things more human includes having a pedagogy that is more human, inclusive, transformative. I think those were the words you used, right? So it should always be pedagogy first, technology thereafter. And technology should only be used in education if it enables something that is either pedagogically motivated or that can simply not be done without technology. So, and you know, if you think of most educational technologies, they don't pass that last filter, right? Because if you think, oh, it could actually be done without technology, and if that's the case, it's probably better not to have the technology mediating that pedagogy because it distracts. So I'm quite skeptical about technology as a solution to educational problems. Having said that, I started 2 technology startups, and they're quite successful, but they're because they enable things that cannot be done without that technology. But again, it's a niche. It's really the problems that we have in education are so much bigger than that, as we've been discussing here.
Yeah. And now coming back to Carl, many educators feel that active learning sacrifices breadth of content. Do you believe depth should take precedence in preparing students for a rapidly changing future?
I mean, the answer is yes. I think depth ought to count more, but I don't agree that you have to sacrifice very much content to include active learning. We, at these large-scale initiatives that I ran, we looked at this pretty carefully, and you know, you have to think carefully about how you're going to use classroom time to maximize the coverage of the material. But if you do it thoughtfully, you don't really have to give up very much content. Although, you know, a PowerPoint presentation can certainly cover vast amounts of content in an hour. You know, you can go through 300 or 400 slides, but the amount of learning that takes place there is totally zero. And so when people had really fairly thoughtfully prepared lectures and then they converted that to active learning, they oftentimes had to give up a little bit, but not very much. But, you know, in any case, what you really care about is the amount that students learn, not how much you've covered. And when you start measuring it from that point of view, you come out way ahead with active learning.
Yeah, if I may briefly, I know I just like to pile on this because I think this is such an important point that Carl is making. And I think research shows pretty conclusively that there is not much depth or breadth during passive learning, right? I mean, think about my lectures before I changed from lecturing, and I was so happy with my lectures, and my students were happy with my lectures, and they passed the exam, yet they could not produce a coherent explanation of the most basic concept in physics, namely that of force, right? So I covered everything, but the students learned very little. Yes, they could regurgitate whatever I taught them on exams, but very little sticks. Think about everything you learned in college, especially outside your field of expertise. Would you still be able to pass the exams that you passed way back when? What does that tell you, right? In an active learning sense, at least students learn skills that are retained, all learned by doing. So what I like to say, and I think it was Vicky Weisskopf at MIT who once said that what matters is not how much is covered by the instructor, but how much is uncovered in the brains of the students.
But that brings me to let's say atomic physics. Don't we need to know the whole background of forces, electricity, particles, interactions, and all that stuff to come to today's understanding of what an atom is and what it can or cannot do? So how do we cover all that content if we are going to if you're going to go by depth? Either one of you.
I mean, I certainly believe there is a substantial content you need to cover in order to understand later things. I mean, physics in some ways has a big advantage over many other disciplines in that we have things that so clearly build on each other.
Yes.
And so, so I wouldn't say that you don't have to cover that. I'm just saying that I don't think you have to sacrifice the learning that matters by giving lectures. I think you can still cover all the things you need students to learn and have them learn it better with active learning.
Okay.
And also we need to recognize not everybody is going to be an atomic physicist, right? I mean, or even a physicist for that matter. And who are we to decide what our graduates, and I'm not talking the ones who are becoming physicists, but in any other field, need to know in later life, especially in this age of AI and the internet, where you can pull anything out of that, right? I mean, let's say that because of the choice of field I made, I forgot what the choice of field was in physics. I never get exposed to the electron anymore, and I forget what the charge of the electron is. It could very well happen. And let's say that one day I need that value again. I look it up, and I look it up again the next day because I've forgotten again, and I look it up maybe a week later. If I look it up 10 times, I'll know it, and I'll know it not because somebody tells me, Eric, you cannot be a successful physicist without knowing the charge on the electron. No, I know it because I need it. Right? So the memorization doesn't come from being forced upon me. It comes from the context of what I'm doing. And I think we should treat our students roughly the same way, because ultimately, most of them aren't going to need a lot of the things that we teach them. On the other hand, telling them how to find information, telling them how to do research, telling them all the skills that are important, I think is much more valuable. Learning how to solve problems, learning how to fill in the information that you don't know. A real problem in engineering, in life, in business, whatever, has more unknown than known. Students scream if there's not enough information to solve a problem. They think we're cheating them, right? But unfortunately, that's life. And they need to learn how to supplement that information by, the things that they don't know. Rather than giving them everything they need to know on a little silver platter and asking them simply to manipulate the quantities and the symbols.
Yeah. And in fairness, having now started teaching where students have to go find out information and figure out what information they need and find it, they can do it. And they stop screaming once you make it clear that, this is a skill that you expect them to that they will need, and you expect them to learn, and you have them practice doing it. Then they get used to it, and then it's okay. But
yeah,
Eric's
it's
right.
like
When you
it's like
when
going
you
to the gym and working out, but you're working out your brain.
yeah.
Okay. Still to Carl, still on the same topic, how do we reconcile the tension between content coverage and cultivating deep understanding?
Yeah, so I think I've pretty much covered that already. You need deep understanding, but I think if you plan carefully your content coverage, you don't have to sacrifice very much compared to giving a reasonable lecture anyway.
I think this would be also a great opportunity, Carl, to bring up one of your, favorite subjects, and which you were the one who pointed out the importance of that, which is backward design, right? And you resolve the tension in a sense by setting learning outcomes and then thinking, what do I need to do in the classroom? What content do I need to pull in to accomplish those learning outcomes?
Yeah, that's a very good point, which is the designing your course by thinking very carefully what you want students to be able to do at the outcome of your course. I mean, so that's what matters. And then you think back about how you would need to have them practice the thinking so that they could master that. And sometimes when people go through that process of thinking about what the learning objectives are, everything they want students to do, they realize this is a ridiculous list. This is way beyond what's reasonable to expect any student to master, and then they readjust things. And when the other times they just, it's a reasonable list, and that allows them to better structure their teaching, and it also provides much more guidance to the students about what they need to be learning and how to learn it, because it's laid out for them. Otherwise students have a lot of trouble in courses trying to figure out what is it I'm really supposed to learn here. And that's when you're just first learning, being exposed to a subject, that's an important and difficult question to answer. And so making it more explicit for students is beneficial, and it's also beneficial for the instructor to be thinking much more explicitly about what they want students to be able to accomplish.
Okay. That's quite a long list to to be done based on learning objectives and all those list of things. Yeah, it's quite crazy. Eric, how do you ensure students remain accountable for their own learning in a participatory classroom?
Well, I'd say, students are and always have been accountable for their own learning, right? There's no way that I, as the instructor, can do the learning for them. But I guess what you're aiming at is really the incentives, or maybe the motivation to learn. So when I lectured, the accountability was in a sense the exam, but as I told you earlier, I then discovered that my students were able to pass the exam, but unable to answer questions that I thought were really simple. So I've certainly abolished exams because I think they give the wrong incentives to students. And I've switched to much more of an oral assessment. So in my current introductory physics course, students are sitting in teams. It's a teams and project-based course, and they sit around tables. I have 160 students in the class, so I need quite a few tables. In fact, I break the class up in groups that go through these exercises at different time, and they solve problems together. And when they're ready to present the team solution of the problem to us being me and my teaching assistants, one of us goes and essentially gives a very brief oral assessment. Prabha, why don't you present the team solution? They don't know who I pick. So there's a social responsibility for the learning, because let's say that I'm part of your team, Prabha, and I have not looked at the problem before class. So you have to bring me up to speed, or I have not done my reading before class, and you discover that very quickly, and you get nervous because the instructor could pick me rather than you, and I'm going to sink the entire team.
Yeah.
So that social responsibility is great. Now it's no longer that they're responsible to me. No, they're responsible to their peers.
Okay.
And they're much more sensitive to that.
Okay.
But the assessment is low stakes. It happens, every student probably every week gets a 5-minute little oral exam, which is not an oral exam like a traditional oral exam. So present the problem. And then, why did you do this? Why did you do that? You learn so much more about how people think than by just looking at a written solution. And the other thing is, I already alluded to that, it's really awakening the intrinsic motivation to learn, right? If you have an intrinsically motivated learner, that learner will do anything to learn. The problem is that with exams and passive approach to teaching, we disincentivize people to learn. So that's why I use both the team-based learning and the project-based learning. And many of the projects that I have my students work on have a component of empathy or social good. So, it might even in the beginning not have anything to do with physics. And when they're really excited about the project, I tell them, you may want to look at these chapters in this textbook because they may help you with your problem. So the content, and this is sort of following up on what Carl and I have said about this tension between content and skills. The content is not an abstract goal in the mind of students anymore. No, it's a vehicle to accomplish a goal that's much more meaningful to the students, the goal of the project. So I think really it's a matter of changing our assessment practices, which we have to do anyway, given what AI is doing. And secondly, finding ways of reawakening that intrinsic motivation that we're all born with, the intrinsic motivation to learn that we're all born with, that disappears, and that all of a sudden reappears when we're done with our formal education. I mean, think about it. Isn't that sad that we start out life so motivated to learn, and then we go through this trough where the motivation is completely gone, and then in the end, when we're done with our formal education, we rediscover the beauty of learning.
Right.
It should always be high.
I agree on that. I concur. I can feel it. I hated my school teachers until I came up to my master's PhD, when I was free to do my own thing, do my own research, learn up things that I need, and suddenly I discovered, oh, I didn't know this, and it just went on, and suddenly, oh, okay, I know where to stop, I know where to start, I know things. Yeah, I concur. I completely agree with what you say.
So if I can just add sort of one sort of general kind of theoretical result, which is in this study I mentioned where we studied experts, their knowledge was always organized around how it could be used to make these problems, solve problems, to make decisions. And so that's convinced me that the best way to kind of present knowledge to people is in how it is to be used. Just as a so this is really sort of generalizing what Eric was saying about how his students found it so much more kind of motivating and meaningful to have knowledge when that they were needing to use for something. But I'm just making the point that I think in any form of teaching, it's almost certainly more valuable to present new knowledge in the context of how it's useful, what it can be used for. Because everything we've learned in physics is a solution at some level, is a solution to a problem. It's a way to solve problems that people have figured out.
Yeah, actually, you're right. Yeah, physics was essentially solved problems by our prior people. Yeah,
but too often it's presented as here are solutions without understanding why it's a solution, where it can be useful, and why.
Yeah, that's nice. Where am I now? Okay. Oh, on your answer, Eric, in relation to that answer, how does peer instruction differ from project or problem-based learning, which is also learner-centric?
Yeah, I mean, I would say all are forms of active learning and are learning-centric, but they're different pedagogies, and one does not exclude the other. In fact, in my classroom, I use all three.
Okay. All right.
Use all three, and I think the more we can do, and I used to only do peer instruction, and but it did not help with the intrinsic motivation to learn. I would start the semester by saying, in this course, you will learn skills that are really important, and I honestly believe that's true, and I'm sure Carl agrees with me as well. In a physics course, you learn skills that are very valuable, even outside of physics. But put yourself in the shoes of a student, engineering students or a pre-med student. You already decided you're going into engineering or into medicine. I mean, when you hear your professor say that you learn something that is really valuable, to you, it sounds a little bit like your mother's telling you eat your spinach, or your dentist telling you be sure to brush your teeth every time. You roll your eyes and you think, of course, he's a physicist, that's why he's saying that, right? So I discovered that just doing peer instruction is not enough. I really have to find ways of reawakening the inner child, in a sense, this curiosity. I mean, we haven't used the word curiosity very much yet, I think, but that's really the key to unlocking deeper learning.
Okay, so essentially it's not just one particular mode, but to combine all modes. I think what you're saying is quite importantly to assess the types of students, also to see which might work best with that particular batch and all that. So we have to be on those at all times.
I'm kind of very dubious that there's a best method for given students. I think these are sort of each different ways of getting the students doing mental processing, and it's different kinds of mental processing are involved in the different approaches, and so they each have value and different kinds of value, and I'm almost certain that the combination is really best for all students, and rather than some things being better for some and others not.
You're saying to go with all three, all modes.
Or whatever is practical in your environment. It might not be all three at once, but multiple aspects are good.
Okay.
If you have a traditional auditorium and you're first launching into this, maybe peer instruction is the easiest to adopt and implement. And then later, I mean, it's not that I went to team-based, project-based learning and, and peer instruction all at the same time. I think that would have been too much for me and for my students. It was an evolution over many years. So if somebody is still standing in front of a classroom lecturing and is considering, after listening to Carl and me for an hour and 25 minutes, thinking maybe I should try something different, maybe that peer instruction is the easiest to do because you can stick to the classroom you're using, the auditorium you're using, you can stick to the material you're using, and at least see the effects of engaging the students.
Yeah. Okay. On that note, this next question was supposed to be for Eric, but I think I have to open it up to both of you. So many faculty members feel overwhelmed by the cultural and cognitive shift required to move beyond lectures, since we're talking about peer instruction and all that. So what personal mindset shifts are most important for educators towards making this transition? Open to either one.
So let me talk about the Stanford physics department, because I mean, I've run big programs where we supported many science faculty to change how they're teaching. But the Stanford physics department has the teaching of almost all its undergraduate courses now has changed to be active learning, basically, of various types, but pretty well standardized. And so that wasn't any sort of top-down clear organization. And it was surprisingly easy. It was just sort of a few people doing it and liking it, realizing what needed to be done, being willing to talk to their colleagues, especially their junior colleagues, about how it worked, giving them some pointers on it. And so it really, I look at that as sort of a working example of getting this change isn't nearly as hard as I thought it might be. In that we Stanford's a good physics department with good faculty, but a lot of them have just more or less spontaneously by seeing examples, and not just seeing examples, but having the people doing those examples being willing to talk to them and give a little bit of advice on how to do things.
Yeah. So the Stanford story is very illuminating, because when my book on peer instruction came up, it was one of your colleagues who first started implementing it in her introductory course.
Pat McCat, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Pat.
And at Harvard, nobody paid attention to my book on peer instruction, but Pat did and implemented it in her course. And then one of my colleagues from Harvard went to give a colloquium at Stanford and spoke to Pat Burkhardt, and Pat said, "Oh, we've implemented, peer instruction. It was developed by one of your colleagues at Harvard," and she showed the results. She was a very enthusiastic early adopter of peer instruction. And that person, I forgot who it was exactly. I think it was either Dave Nelson or somebody else, came to me and knocked on my door and said, "I hear that at Stanford they're using something you're doing in your," they didn't know about it, something in your class. It had to be adopted by another university before, they were convinced that they might have to try it too. But I think that first and foremost, as an instructor, it's important to acknowledge two things. One is that most of our students are not like us professors. We were the outliers under the bell curve. Yeah. We're the people who, you could put in a closet for 4 years and we'd come out, knowing more than we did when we entered the closet. And then the other thing that I think is important to acknowledge before you can even make a mind shift is that the amount of learning that takes place in the traditional classroom is very disappointing, and also that it's easy to be misled by the result of exams. And for that, you either have to test your own students or believe the literature. But most people don't read the educational literature, unfortunately. And lastly, I think, or second, because I think there's even a third point, I think it's important to have an open mind, right? I mean, it's all too easy to say it works. It worked for me. We've sent people to the moon, right? Why, as you said in the beginning, why change? And lastly, I think maybe the most crucial part, and maybe we can talk about this later, is we need institutional support and incentives.
Yeah.
It's like moving a mountain.
Yeah.
And I have experienced that firsthand, right? It's like moving a mountain stone by stone. I mean, the whole system in education is built in such a way as to not change. And therefore pushing it is like not pushing an elephant, no, pushing a mountain. Carl, you're smiling.
Well, I'm smiling, but I mean, I agree, and I say the evaluation of teaching is one really big impediment, actually, to the better adoption of better pedagogy, that we do such a poor job of really evaluating that universities generally do such a poor job of evaluating the quality of teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we should be evaluating the learning, not the teaching.
Yeah. Or you can be evaluating the quality of teaching practices being used that might is an alternative, but
you're hitting the nail, on the head. The teaching evaluation is another of these factors that prevent change.
But, I think one thing it is useful to keep in mind is, and I have the experience, like I say, of running these initiatives that change the teaching of, I think we have several hundred faculty members across the two large universities. And we went and looked at how many, with support incentives and so on, changed their teaching, how many changed back, and it was virtually none, and so the overwhelming number just feel that teaching this way, once they've learned to do it, is so much more rewarding that they almost none of them would actually go back to lecturing. It just feels kind of so pointless and and unsatisfying after you learn the alternatives. And that in itself is a really powerful incentive to people.
You're muted.
I was supposed to ask about that, but since both of you have answered it, let me rephrase it. What do our institutions want to see when we make these changes? Do they want to see passing rates, or do they want to see successful people?
I don't know, because it's such a general question, and
yeah, it is.
Don't even know.
Very open question. Yeah.
And really, it's the leadership of the institution, and if I even look at my own institution, the leadership now has very different priorities from the leadership a while back. So I don't really know how to answer that question, but I'd say what really matters ultimately is how successful our graduates are. And have we equipped them with the right skills and the right knowledge to be successful in a future career, whichever their career are. In a future that's unknown, it makes the whole thing even more difficult, right? Yeah. It's definitely different from what our future was when we were in college, and we all fall in the trap of projecting our own experiences onto the world around us. So I find it a very difficult question to answer.
Yes, it is.
I would just add one thing. Eric talks about what you'd like to see in your graduates. And I think it's fair to say that you'd like to see in all of your students able to graduate with those skills. And so, you know, the number that you lose along the way is also an important thing to look at. Are you, you know, because one thing we do know is that active learning reduces failure rates and dropout rates significantly. So
actually, that's a good point, Carl. And I think you cannot completely decouple the graduation rate from the assessment that is used to determine the graduation rate, right?
yeah,
I mean, if that assessment is an assessment that really doesn't tell us what we need to know about the graduates, and I'm afraid that a lot of our assessment falls into that category. Maybe not in your class and my class, but certainly in the class of, you know, in many of the classes around this world. Then, you know, what does the graduation rate even matter? I mean, we can make long list of dropouts who have become extremely successful, you know, from Nobel Prize winners, Lars Onsager and others who barely published anything yet, you know, made enormous contributions to science, to people who were extremely successul in society. I mean, think of Steve Jobs, and we can make a long list. So I really think we need to think hard about assessment and about, you know, what are the things that we measure, because we can always artificially change the graduation rate by making the assessment, you know, simpler, or test more rote memorization, or even help students to memorize better and pass rote memorization exams so the graduation rates go up. But is that any good? It's a house of cards that will sooner or later will collapse.
Right. I can sort of give an example. I've been beginning to dabble into amateur radio, and I find that amount of information, people who are not professors, people who are just sitting at home. One of the best builders is a church pastor, and the amount of information, the amount of technology used in simple thing as building a radio is fantastic. So I really concur with what you say. Yeah, the amount of knowledge, where it comes from, how it's used. Wow, that's profound. That's profound. And related to that, Carl, you've worked closely with education policymakers. So what institutional changes, we are on the same topic, what institutional changes are most critical for long-term teaching reform?
you know, I haven't been very successful at convincing people of this, but my opinion is that this by far the single most important is the evaluation of teaching, and being able to do it in a way that you can have meaningful comparisons across departments, across institutions, etc. Like, you know, like we do for research, and that there's enormous amounts of effort go into evaluating the quality of research at an institution, and you know, institutions are fighting to be move higher on the rating list and so on, and that comparison. If we could do anything remotely similar in terms of the quality of education, I think that would make an enormous impact. But you know, it's not easy to do. Also,
yeah, it's not easy. Yeah. Okay. And we move on to our. Do we have time?
Yeah. Do we have time for questions from the audience here?
I think, yeah. I think I'll stop asking questions and go to audience questions then. Okay. The first question was Miss Mehar Said. Most of the researchers who come to education, they speak a different language, and I find most of the time there is a disconnect in their own world and students' world. Why can't we speak the same language to engage our students? Whoa, this is philosophical.
I think it's not not so philosophical. It's more practical.
Practical,
And
okay.
every discipline has its jargon. And in the beginning, I was very aware of that because I was unaware of the educational jargon. So when I wrote my first paper on the results of peer instruction back in the early 1990s, I didn't use any educational jargon because I didn't know any educational jargon, right? But then as you start to mingle with people who are doing education research, you get exposed to concepts that you didn't know about before, from metacognition to formative and summative evaluation. And it's the same thing actually in many disciplines where we use acronyms and don't explain the acronyms that we use. I remember once being at a Gordon conference, I think it was in Ireland, in Cork, and it was multidisciplinary. It had people from lots of different disciplines. I was sitting next to a mathematician, and somebody was speaking and was using one acronym that didn't mean anything to me to another. So I looked at my neighbor, and he looked at me and shook his head, and we said, I said to him, I hate acronyms. And he said, I do too. I was the next speaker, and I thought, okay, I'm going to show him talk without any acronyms. And then after my talk, I sat down next to him, and he said, I'm disappointed, you were using acronyms. I said, no, I was not using any acronyms. Sure enough, there was a slide where I had, transmission electron microscope, abbreviated as TEM. That acronym had become so, a concept on its own.
Yeah.
I think we have that not only with papers in another field, let's say from chemistry to education or physics to education. We have it even within one discipline, right? I mean, a string theorist will never have heard of a transmission electron microscope or a TEM. So I think if you're interested in education, you will need to teach yourself some new concepts that you haven't learned before. But see that as an opportunity to grow and, be curious, have an open mind.
But I think that's one reason Eric and I get asked to speak a lot to science departments, is because we can do a better job speaking their language than lots of education people who might know similar things to us, but aren't able to present it equally to scientists.
Yeah, and I think we are aware, we're very conscious of the world. We may occasionally fall into the trap that I fell with the TEM, but in general, when I introduce something about metacognition, I will say, I will explain what the concept is. I will say that this comes from psychology and what it means.
That makes sense. The fact that both of you have dabbled in both worlds. Yeah. Next one from Dr. Sharifah Nurfaiza, one of our producers. I feel that nowadays Gen Z and students tend to be quite rigid, overly cautious about questioning things, and more focused on simply following instructions. They often just ask what to do next rather than exploring the why behind tasks. Why do you think this is happening? How can we change it? Personally, I sometimes feel stressed communicating with people who think this way. And a few people concur that. So the question is, why do the youngsters do not ask why?
So there may well be differences in issues there that one could see, but I'm always very nervous when because this issue of people saying, well, this generation isn't as good as my generation was, the deficiencies of the current generation compared to my youth, that's actually documented back to Socrates, making, and sort of everywhere in between. And so I think there's a fundamental issue that people tend to see the value, much more value in the things that they know that maybe the younger students don't know. They see more value in that than the things that the younger generation knows that the older generation doesn't. And so I think there's kind of this very built-in bias always of thinking that there's deficiencies in the latest generation. And so, I'm, without really hard data, I'm always very skeptical actually of these sort of claims. So I won't completely dismiss this statement that saying that the generation is wrong. I will just express skepticism in general about the feeling that there's some problem with the latest generation, just because you hear it goes so far back over and over and over again.
Could it be because let me give me an example. When I was young, helicopters were a wow thing for me. Every time a helicopter passes by, I'm out of the house looking at it, making all those choppy noises. But my daughter is so commonplace for her, she just, it's just a helicopter, so what? Could it be that is a point also, too much information that is commonplace for them?
It could be that. It also is that, there's much more exposure to social media, and that may affect people's behavior and personalities, I think. But I think we don't really completely understand how extensive that is and exactly what the impacts are.
Right. And there is, of course, another thing, and which I think I've seen in my students. And that is that the students that we have in college right now went through their final years of high school during COVID and during, isolation at home. And I think there's been a definite loss of social skills, and I think it's impacted many students in a negative way. And maybe that has also an impact on their study habits and their desires to learn. I think we should take that into account as a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see a variety of impacts of COVID that are still happening in our students. That's much more recent in some sense than the whole generational impacts.
Yeah, it will probably take a good a decade or two before the COVID bubble passes off.
Yeah. I think that's probably, unfortunately, that's probably true.
Next question by Mr. Kasim. What are your views on university rankings, and if students should care about this? Also, is university education going to be important for future employability? I think that's a sure, but rankings and student.
Yeah, I am as skeptical about university ranking as Carl is about teaching evaluations, because I think, typically the metrics that are being used to rank institutions are, based on questionable criteria. I mean, imagine, let's make an imaginary plot in our minds, right? You put sort of the quality of the institution or the quality of the students, let's say, on a vertical scale, and time on the horizontal. Right? Take a school like Harvard or Stanford, which is very selective and takes in students very high on this vertical scale at the beginning of their college, right? So at the vertical axis, the students are already very high, and we move them up, but we move them only up a little bit, but they still end up at the top. Why? Because we took them in at the very top. And now consider some community college or some, very low-ranking school, which takes them all the way in the bottom 10%, but actually moves them up 2 or 3 times as much as we do at Stanford or Harvard. Which of those schools does a better job? I don't know. I mean, if we only ride on our input and not on our output, what does that says something about the selectivity. So and if you look, I mean, just look in society at the people who are successful. Carl, where did you get your undergraduate degree?
MIT.
MIT. Okay, I was not as fortunate. Oh, that's right. You were with Pritchard, right?
But yeah, Pritchard Kleppner. Yeah.
Yeah. So I went to Leiden University. I don't know where it ranks, but it's way below MIT. And if I look at most of my colleagues at Harvard, they're not Harvard graduates or Ivy League graduates. So I think that this ranking is overblown, and it pushes institutions to do not the right thing, the wrong things actually.
Yeah,
including trying to manipulate their ranking.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I was going to say is those rankings they're not based on what is most meaningful. They're based on what they have data for. And so they're really quite artificial. The institutions really manipulate things. And so I'm very skeptical of them myself.
So how in relation to that, how are students supposed to choose their future?
Ultimately, they're responsible for their own future or their own study. And I'm sure that you can get a really good education at much more than just the top schools, provided you have the right approach and motivation to learn. I mean, there was this wonderful story that somebody wrote. I reacted to it in the chat. Let's see if I can quickly.
So essentially, you're saying that both of you are saying that the student is the diamond in the rough. Whoever cuts it is going to shine a bit more or a bit less, but it's still going to come out as a nice piece of jewel.
I mean, it's not really this. I would disagree with your analogy because it's really the student is going to determine its quality as a diamond. So it's doing the cutting.
That's what I mean. That the diamond is already there. The institution is just going to polish it a bit here and there. Yeah.
And I think students could get a very good education at a very wide range of different universities, and the university ranking, especially with regard to education, is really meaningless. So
that I agree.
I was referring to this story by Imdad Mahmoud, who wrote, during high school, when I asked my teacher a question during class, he told me I should only memorize the important concepts to pass the exam. He advised that asking questions would not help me succeed. This motivated me to seek answers on my own, read books, and consulting another teacher instead until my question was answered. When I reached graduate school, I felt that my curiosity was truly valued. And I replied, and it probably paid off then, right? And paid off in a career because, so there you see how, it really ultimately has to come from the learner. And sometimes it comes intrinsically, sometimes it doesn't. But, our role as teachers, I think, is to reawaken that intrinsic motivation to learn, that desire to learn.
Yeah. I can relate to that when I was put through graduate school, postgraduate, and that's where I would say I really learned. All the other prior stuff was just like finding the right screw here and there, but what actually made me learn was finding out on my own. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yuan, where else are we? I think this is quick. Can you say what is currently wrong about physics education research from
I
Singapore?
think there's more wrong about physics education than physics education research, I think. I don't know, Carl.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I'm not sure.
It's still a budding field, and I think it's a very important field, and it should have any discipline-specific education research should actually be represented by the discipline, precisely because of what we talked about before, about the language differences. Right? If we leave all of the education research to the School of Education, it's going to, probably adopt more and more terms specific to education.
Yeah.
So I don't see anything wrong, frankly, or anything patently wrong with education research.
I mean, I guess thinking about what Eric's saying, I get a bit concerned that I think it might be getting a little far away, or some of it might be getting a little too far away from the physics aspects, that people are, some people are moving more towards kind of exploring social things and so on, and that it's not that they're not important, but that they don't have that much to do with the physics itself. And so I think from the discipline is going to thrive, it needs to remember that its roots have to be in physics and learning and thinking about physics. And so I do get concerned sometimes it gets a little far from that.
I totally agree. That's why I use the term discipline specific, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
And yeah, I think the next one was also related to that. So that has been out. So, but also from Singapore, how do you think gender diversity in physics can be improved?
Well, I think it is already improving. I mean, we certainly have a lot more physics faculty members than we had before. I mean, it's still not a 50-50 balance. When I was president of the Optical Society, now Optica, we voted to really work hard on making the leadership of the Optical Society 50% female. First, there was a proposal to make it 30% female, and I said, where does that number 30% come from?
Yeah.
And there are 50% females on the planet, and people had to admit that. And we decided to change that proposal from 30% to 50%. And in 5 short years, we had half of the board and half of the presidents, which was not easy because so rather than working from the bottom up, to also set a model from the top down. Now that's in optics, which is only one branch of physics. Actually, it transcends several disciplines because there's optics in chemistry, there's optics in biology, there's photonics in medicine. But at least it shows the possibility of really readjusting the balance and sending the right signals to young women who are considering a career in science or in optics.
Okay. Mr. Faisal asks, what is a good prototype of teaching and assessment component? Quizzes, homework, tests, are they essential in learning, and how many of them per course? This is,
So
I think we have answered this earlier in our debate.
I mean, just the one quick thing I'll say is that research is pretty clear that from an educational standpoint, frequent low stakes. If you're going to have exams, frequent low stakes exams are much better than a few very high stakes exams. That's sort of, what do you want to call them, quizzes or tests. And I think, you know, homework is clearly valuable. And so, you know, that's just a quick summary of a couple of points.
Okay. Velin.
Prof.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's about 11.
What time? Yeah.
Yeah.
One
I'm
last
worried
one.
about Carl. Carl now is about 11.
11.
In the morning.
You too, by the way, and I have to get up at 5. So
Yeah.
Can I just read this one last one on AI?
It's supposed to be the last one.
Yeah. The AI part by Velin. Recently in the course saying that certain AI has hallucinations, which they gave out made up facts that seems very real. Isn't it dangerous if AI is used in education, replacing the teachers and lectures? Is it okay if these AI teachers lack human touch?
So it's absolutely right. It's very dangerous as long as we have AI that does make things up, but it's even worse. I mean, we've studied this some, and they make things up in very convincing ways so that it's particularly misleading for students. And so, yeah, that's a serious problem with AI.
yeah. Look, I mean, AI is going to play an important role in society and therefore affect education also indirectly by, you know, requiring a very different set of skills from our students. I think we see all kinds of negative effects already. When I saw the first demonstration of the internet from Mark Andreessen back in 1991, I was so excited because I thought this is going to democratize the world. It's going to make it possible to, you know, spread the knowledge and spread all the right things. I was just too optimistic. Look at what the internet has done. It's polarized the world. It had all this negative impact on society, and AI puts that on steroids. So I think we really need to educate our students very differently in the age of AI, especially since AI actually does most of the work we ask them to do better than any student can. So teaching them that there is no human touch, it's simply a statistical algorithm that is regurgitating words in a very convincing way, as Carl said. And rather than using AI to teach students or to tell students they cannot use AI, to incorporate it in a way that makes it meaningful. And I don't have the ready answer to that yet, because the world is shifting so quickly, but I think it's very important.
Okay. All right, I think we should put a closure with that on this lively, and if Nazri doesn't stop me, it's going to be non-ending.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, guys, for the very insightful and fantastic and lively dialogue on education. Before we bid you farewell and good night, we'd like to have a photo with both of you and our listeners. So listeners, please switch on your cameras, take a picture.
While we're doing that, I'll just say good night to all, and nice to see you, Eric, and nice talking with you. As always.
Nice meeting you again too.
Yeah.
Cameras, guys, cameras.
Good.
And Eric, I think probably I will try to get you as the only speaker for the ISICS for the next year or for the next following years. Is it okay?
Did you talk to me? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
It's easy because you get to do it by Zoom. So
Yeah.
All right. Few more cameras. Come on. Okay, Shah, are we done?
Wait.
Okay, a bit more here. Keep the cameras on, please. Okay. Okay.
Okay, Prof.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Prof. Carl and Prof. Eric, for the lively discussion. I think there is a online cert, Nazri? Yeah.
Yeah, there will be online set for the participant. We send you the QR code.
Okay, participants, please hang on. There'll be a QR code. And Carl and Eric, fantastic talking to both of you. Hope we could engage you again in the future. Thank you and good night. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thanks, Eric. Thanks, Carl.
Bye, Carl.